Why Social Science Congressional Briefing, which is a new series brought to you by the Consortium of Social Science Associations, or COSSA, with support from Sage Publishing. I'm Wendy Naus. I'm Executive Director of the Consortium of Social Science Associations here in Washington. I have the pleasure of introducing and moderating today's discussion. Very briefly, COSSA launched Why Social Science, our new initiative, in January as a way to bring stories about the benefits of our sciences to the public. Often misunderstood, the social sciences, which include psychology, sociology, linguistics, economics, political science, anthropology, no doubt a lot of the fields that you all studied at some point in your educational career, are an important component of the STEM scientific enterprise here in the U.S. The main feature of Why Social Science is a website, whysocialscience.com, and a bi-weekly blog series that highlights the value of social and behavioral science research to our everyday lives. Just since January, we have featured voices representing different producers, users, and stakeholders of social science research, three of whom are featured on today's panel. The stories will continue to be produced through the rest of this year and into next year. And the blogs of our featured speakers today are included in your folders and available at whysocialscience.com. So I encourage you not only to check those out, but also to subscribe as well to get those every other week. So we have a small program change today, and just to briefly introduce our speakers, although we have a special guest, so I will table that for 1 second. We have the privilege of having Congressman Lipinski with us today, who was kind enough to also produce a blog post for us, and I would invite you to read that online as well. And so I would love to welcome Congressman Lipinski to the podium for just some welcoming remarks. Congressman? Oh, there's plenty. We'll get you some.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for thank COSSA for putting this together. Thank our panelists for being here. Why social science? I've been for the last 12 and a half years on the science committee, trying to raise this issue and make the point about how important social science is, the importance of funding social science research, because everything that social science does, everything that, how necessary it is to help us solve so many problems that people don't automatically think about social science. But it's involved because most of our problems have to do with people. People are involved in them. Social science tells us about what motivates people to a large extent. That's sort of what made me interested. One of the things I was most interested in when I studied political science. So in teaching political science as a political science assistant professor. But I think it's very important that we continue to make the case of how important social science is. And cybersecurity is a big thing right now. It's so important, cybersecurity. Probably one of the most important things that most people don't immediately think about that. So that's one of the places where it's important. We need to keep funding social science. We can promote social science, people's understanding of social science. And so I think COSSA for the work that they're doing, for being here today. And yes, read my blog post, but probably not their post. So, but thank you for having me.
Thank you. We're really grateful to have the support of the Congressman, as well as the support of countless other social science champions here in the Congress who really do understand the potential of our sciences to affect positive change for our country and for our populace. So, but we're also very fortunate today to have a distinguished panel representing diverse segments of the scientific enterprise, from psychology, and public health. They're just a sample of the reach of social and behavioral science to issues of national significance. So turning to our panel, as I mentioned, we have a small program change. We will start first with Peter Harsha, who is the Director of Government Affairs for the Computing Research Association. CRA's membership includes academic departments of computer science, information, and computer engineering, industry, government, and academic laboratories and centers, and affiliated professional societies. And he will speak from the perspective of a non-social science discipline that relies on social science research. Next, we will hear from Dr. Nancy Vigne. She is the director of the Justice Policy Center at the Urban Institute here in Washington, and chair of the Inter-Society Crime and Justice Research Alliance. She's also a member of the COSSA Board of Directors. Among her research interests is research on prisoner reentry, criminal justice technologies, crime prevention, policing, and the spatial analysis of crime and criminal behavior. And last, we will hear from Dr. Bill Riley, who is the director of the Office of Behavioral and Social Sciences Research at the National Institutes of Health. Among its many important activities, OBSSR is responsible for coordinating behavioral and social science research conducted or supported by NIH and integrate these sciences within the larger NIH research enterprise. Dr. Riley's personal research interests include behavioral assessment, psychosocial health risk factors, tobacco use and cessation, and the application of technology to prevent health behaviors and chronic disease management. So whether you're here because you're interested in criminal justice reform or cybersecurity or public health, I hope you'll stick around to hear from each of our experts so that you can really understand the breadth of social science research and how they're being brought to bear on issues of national and global importance. So with that, I will invite the panel to speak, starting with Peter, and they're going to stay at the table.
Thank you, Wendy. So as Wendy mentioned, I'm Peter Harsha. I'm a core facsimile for Andy Burnett, who is our executive director at CRA. Andy feels very badly that he couldn't be here today, not just because literally he feels badly, he's got the flu, but also because this issue is particularly important to him. He spent a lot of time and energy on it, and he hopes to be here to show his report as well. But I have his talking points, and I'm reasonably well briefed on them, so we'll just take it from there. He was going to start by pointing out that in the days when he started in computer science, computers were big boxes that were in glass rooms that were managed by teams of people in white lab coats. And I'll just say that he's a little bit older than I am, but I still have that memory as well, but it was only because I went with my father, who was an engineer. He would bring my brother and I, when we were much younger, into his office on Saturday mornings and let us loose on the punch card machine so that we could entertain ourselves while he finished whatever work he needed to do. And that was literally a giant machine with levers and very physical and punching holes and things. In the interim, there have been tremendous efforts by folks in computer engineering to make those big machines much smaller and faster, by the computer scientists to make them much more efficient and much more capable, but to really turn them into machines that didn't require keepers in lab coats to run or didn't require a computer science degree to function, required human-computer interaction research and concerns with usability, and all of that was well informed by the social, behavioral, and economic sciences. Keeping them safe to use as they've developed into really powerful tools also learns a lot and is formed a lot by social, behavioral, and economic science. So really the insight into the human behaviors provided by the social science is really critical to designing and implementing hardware and software that is more secure and easy to use. So a couple of years ago, when the social sciences were under a bit of pressure by policymakers, we as an exercise sort of turned inward and looked to our computing research community and said, can we find good examples of ways in which social sciences inform current computing research? And I was frankly kind of overwhelmed by the robust and rapid response I got from our community, from all sorts of sectors. So from things like in cybersecurity, we recognize that the human is often the weakest link in the chain. It's especially crucial to understand that the the motivations and usage patterns that dictate how people interact with machines is what's going to help make them secure. Social science is incredibly important there. It's been critically valuable in creating systems that form collaborations and encourage creativity in their use. The social sciences have helped create disaster response systems that influence people to effectively find shelter and assistance, understanding how to craft messages that are compelling and convey the urgency of the situation. They have helped create computing systems that motivate adherence and compliance with medical treatments. I assume we'll hear more about this from Bill as well. But as we investigate systems that help seniors, for example, age in place by using technologies to keep them in their own homes as opposed to elsewhere, it's critically important to understand how they actually interact with those technologies, and that's a domain that's well suited to the social sciences, and lots of social science work is going on there. We know that sociology has really helped us understand network principles that inform things like link and content recommendations for social networks. We know that economics and an understanding of auction principles has really been crucial in the creation of online markets, including the market for internet advertising, for better or worse. Psychology helps us understand both really sort of high-level perceptual information and low-level perceptual effects, which is really critical to engineers designing displays, interface designs and software, and it's actually propelling current research in computer vision. Behavioral and economic sciences are guiding the design of anticipatory analytics tools, which provide support for decision makers in places like the DoD and at large companies. These tools are really critical in the sense that for a decision maker to trust them, they need to understand that the machine, the system has salience, it's got credibility, it's got legitimacy, and social science really provides us with insight into how to do that with these systems. Quantitative techniques like risk theory, utility theory, decision theory, they're being applied to software development problems. Game theory is used to model interactions between hackers and those attempting to defend systems. We find social science interlinked with the computer sciences and computer engineering across the disciplines, not just in very particular areas. But just as importantly, social science doesn't just tell us what we can do with the technologies. Increasingly, it's being used to answer the question of what should we do with some of these technologies. So, for example, we're creating this world where algorithms and autonomous agents are becoming increasingly part of our daily life. The issue of algorithmic bias is something that requires much input from the social sciences and the humanities. If the algorithms are determining the outputs that we are directing our lives by, whether it's using Waze or making decisions in other ways, we should understand the way maybe our biases or our unconscious biases getting coded into those algorithms as well. We should understand that the data that we're feeding into the systems has constraints to it. If we're using criminal statistics or crime statistics to feed into a model to use predictive behavior, we should understand what the limitations of those crime statistics are and what the biases that might be present in those are. We're also creating a world in which we are increasingly awash in digital data, and our machines are becoming increasingly adept at sort of wading through that data. And so social scientists are helping us understand the implications of that for our privacy and are actually offering ways to protect that in the research. So in short, since the whole purpose of computing is to accomplish things for people, the social sciences are critical to essentially everything that we do. And so on that basis, we'll continue as an organization to keep spreading that message wherever we have the opportunity, whether it's up here in events on the Hill or whether it's to our own memberships and trying to coordinate activities between the different disciplines. And I think I'll just do that.
Okay, my turn. So forgive me in advance, this might be a preaching to the choir. It occurred to me while I'm sitting here that this room full of people who opt to attend a session on why social science, perhaps you're already interested in social science and may well know more than I do in different aspects of it. I'm representing the criminologists on this panel, and it often occurs to me that I wish I had a better title for what I do. When I'm in other settings, often outside of work, and I share with people what I do for a living, I often feel like I want to just change the answer and say I'm an accountant or a middle school teacher or, I don't know, maybe a real estate agent, because those are all things that people understand. But when I say I'm a criminologist, usually people will say something like, oh, so you're a lawyer, which I'm not, although lawyers can be social scientists, FYI. Or they'll say, oh, you mean like on CSI, which sounds super cool and sexy. It's not what I do. And so then I have to kind of patiently explain, no, actually criminologists are not criminalists, they're not forensic scientists. But we do study aspects of forensic science, for example. So a forensic scientist or a criminalist might ask a question like, what DNA evidence was left on a crime scene that might lead to answers about who was there and what they were up to. We would answer a different type of question. We might look at the question of the value of collecting DNA at property crime scenes and whether that actually contributes to case clearances, so you catch more people when you collect that kind of information. And in fact, my colleagues at the Urban Institute actually did that study, and we found that collecting that DNA evidence at property crime scenes doubles the rate of suspect identification, increases the arrests considerably. That's something that we would do that a criminalist would not do. And similarly, we're not lawyers, most of us. Some of us are, but most of us are sociologists or come from some other discipline, and it's a pretty wide array of disciplines. People who self-identify as criminologists may well have their formal training as demographers or social psychologists, sometimes geographers. So it's a very interdisciplinary field. And despite our diversity, what unites us all is a shared interest in what causes crime and criminal behavior and what policies are effective in addressing issues that will promote safety and promote justice. There's so many examples that I can give you. I'm kind of hard-pressed to figure out which ones to highlight today. I wish I'd asked for a show of hands to ask, what are you most interested in? But you're stuck with what I'm most interested in. It's so tough. But let's just take one example. Let's look at the issue of mass incarceration. And I think most people can agree that it is indeed mass, right? The United States spends about $80 billion dollars to house more than 2 million people in correctional facilities each and every year. That's an astounding volume. And despite all of those investments, we know that on average about 4 in 10 people who are released from prison end up back behind bars in jail. So criminologists can help policymakers figure out what policies and programs and forms of treatment might be best able to help people to stop from reoffending. And also figure out who really truly needs to be incarcerated in the interest of public safety and who might be better served in the community, getting treatment, getting services, getting programs at a much lower public investment in tax dollars. But I want to emphasize something here, because oftentimes when we talk about our work, we recognize that a lot of the research we produce is what I would call confirmatory, right? So you can say, well, why do we need more research? We already knew that works. That makes such common sense. Of course it works. Of course it makes sense to get someone into a halfway house as they transition back to the community. But I think what our research offers is a lot of nuance in that regard. So in the case of halfway houses, one of a landmark study actually in 2013 looked at the impact of going through a halfway house after exiting prison on outcomes, including the most important one, reoffending. And what they found was really interesting. They found that whereas people who were at medium and high risk of reoffending tended to benefit from going through a halfway house, people at low risk of reoffending actually were harmed. Not neutral, but actually harmed by going through a halfway house. Now that seems like, oh, how could that be? And that's where another part of criminology comes into place. We don't just look at the impact of programs, but we kind of look underneath the hood and find out what's going on that might give us context for interpreting findings. In this case, our interpretation of those findings is that if you're at low risk of recidivism, it probably means that you already have substantial social and family supports at your disposal. And halfway houses make you comply with a lot of conditions that might hinder you from getting a job and start making money and being a productive member of society. In fact, a halfway house might be far away from a former employer who would be willing to offer you a job right away. So it's this kind of nuance that we can bring to bear on issues of public safety. Now, you mentioned how computer science isn't a social science, but you rely on it a lot. And one of the things that criminologists do is we look at the impact of technology, which sounds like, oh, is that social science? Well, not when you're testing whether technology works in a lab setting, but it's certainly social science when you're looking at how humans interact with that technology in the field, on the ground, right? So this is a pet interest to me. We've done a lot of evaluations of technologies. And again, it's not so much knowing or learning what works, but how it works. And importantly, and this isn't just a nuance, this is critical, whether the technology is used the way it is supposed to be used and to its greatest impact, right? So let me give you an example of body-worn cameras, the cameras that police wear now, increasingly so, introduced as this great promise for increasing accountability and transparency in police interactions with citizens, particularly on the heels of many and ongoing high-profile fatalities of citizens at the hands of law enforcement. So on its surface, you'd think body cameras would be a useful tool in enhancing transparency, but that's until you look under the hood. So, like, what's the nature of the technology? Well, this may or may not come as a surprise to you, but it happens that officers, when equipped with body-worn cameras, those cameras aren't running 24/7. They have the discretion to turn the cameras on and off. And there's good reasons for that. Most people are entitled to a certain amount of privacy, even on the job. So they might need to call home, they're going to eat a meal, they're going to have to take a bathroom break. They can't have those cameras rolling the whole time. But what does that mean in terms of implementation? It means that they have tremendous discretion in deciding when to turn the camera on and off. So then the question arises, well, what are the policies? Are they supposed to have the cameras on every time they're interacting with a citizen? Some agencies, police departments, are silent on those policies, others are very explicit, but regardless, we're talking about humans, right, and how they interact with the technology, and so they may well forget to turn the cameras on. They may intentionally forget to turn the cameras on. And so that variation in how the humans are interacting with the technology may yield to different impacts. In studies that we've done on body camera use and those that others have done as well, there's some indication that the presence of the camera has a so-called civilizing effect. And that means that it improves behaviors both on the part of the law enforcement officer and the community member. So there's fewer examples of use of force. There's also fewer unfounded citizen complaints. All that said, in a recent study we did, we found that there's some distinct differences in officers who activate their camera more versus less. So officers who are less likely to turn their cameras on were also more likely to arrest people. So that begs some questions about how the technology is implemented and its effectiveness. How are we doing on time? Do we have a few more case studies? One or two more? Okay. We did a study of public surveillance cameras. These are the cameras that are now ubiquitous in most major cities. Sometimes they're covert, they're hidden, you don't know they're there. Other times they're deliberately advertised with flashing blue lights. You see this in Baltimore, Chicago, and other jurisdictions. So the question is, do those cameras have an impact on crime and how? What our evaluation found is that they can have an impact, but only if used in a certain way. So if you just put a camera up and expect that crime will go down, you're going to be very disappointed. If you put the camera up and you have humans who are interacting with that camera and viewing the cameras in real time so that they can zero in on a crime in progress, alert law enforcement, and enable them to capture suspects on the spot, you're going to reduce crime because you're going to have to have more people who are engaging in criminal activity. But you also may well be spreading word on the street that you really shouldn't commit crime because they're going to catch us. Criminology and social science in general also involves the process of cost-benefit analysis. So in the case of the public surveillance camera study, we looked at whether the cost of cameras and the technology, which is there's a lot of hidden costs, it's not just the camera itself, the software and maintenance, it's the humans who interact with it, it's the monitoring and so forth, the training, whether those are commensurate with the savings associated with crimes prevented. And in one jurisdiction where we saw a big impact on crime, we also saw a lot of savings. So with each dollar spent on the technology, $4 were saved in terms of prevented crimes, prevented costs to the criminal justice system. So I'll stop there. Just a few examples of how criminology pertains to the real world and ultimately encourages public safety.
Our group to follow. Hello, everyone. Bill Riley. I want to thank COSSA and thank Wendy for the invitation. When Wendy asked me to write this initial blog about why social science from the perspective of public health and health research, I thought back to an experience I had in New York. I was standing in line. I'd been there for a meeting about medication adherence. I was standing in the line for a play, and a couple asked me why I was in town. And I said, well, I'm here for a medication adherence conference, yada, yada, yada. And then asked me what I did for a living, and I said, well, I'm a psychologist by training. And their next question was, well, why are you at a meeting for medication adherence? And it made me realize how little people understand or underestimate how much of the typical sort of medical encounter, a clinical encounter, is really behavioral and social in nature, right? Your decision about whether or not you seek treatment or seek advice based on a lot of decisional processes and social processes that you're dealing with. How that healthcare system navigates you through those processes, how the healthcare provider makes decisions, the social interaction that you have with the healthcare provider, the expectations that you have or that healthcare provider have about that encounter, and what is it going to be like, and what are you going to get out of it as a result of it. How the healthcare providers make decisions about diagnoses, treatment, and those types of things. And then, of course, when you follow up on all the things that they ask you to do, including whether you take your pills and do the other things that you need to do, as well as the family, social, environmental context in which you have to do that, is quite different to ask someone who's among the sort of upper middle class and relatively affluent with good social capital and capabilities to take a relatively complex regimen. It's another thing altogether as people who are relatively poor with limited sort of resources to be able to do that very same thing. Be able to have to be compliant with the meds. So there's more than that, obviously. Social and behavioral sciences contribute greatly to our ability to sort of manage chronic diseases, whether that's diabetes, hypertension, heart failure, chronic pain, any of a number of disorders where there are proven and effective interventions to help people better manage, stay out of the hospital, reduce rehospitalizations, and those type of things as a result of that work. There are effective psychosocial treatments that we now know are effective for things like depression, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress and other stress-related disorders, insomnia, which some of you probably still have. I could actually give you a treatment for it, looks like some of you may need. And any of a number of things like that, where that's an important component of what we do, is sort of delivering those effective sort of psychosocial treatments for those, as well as various childhood emotional and behavioral disorders. And then, of course, what people typically think about is prevention work that social and behavioral scientists do. The big three, right, smoking, diet, physical activity, all have proven effective interventions to either prevent and or treat those conditions and be able to reduce the burden of disease in the country as a result of being able to do that. But But much of what I think gets missed in this discussion is the social determinants of health